G'day one and all, Jason Tromp here, reaching out to you at this festive period. Hope you and your families are looking forward to a great Christmas and you each get a chance to have a spell, maybe hopefully some time off farm. It's been certainly a challenging year for some, particularly those up through New South Wales predominantly and further up north and even parts of Victoria. And now things starting to bite even in South Australia too. But there's also been other parts that have had a great year and one of the best ever down in deep southwest Victoria. So whatever your circumstances and how things are unfolded, I think what's most important at the moment is you get that chance to have a spell and spend some time with your family. And I suppose as my gift to you, I'm sending you a recording of our most recent Lambs Alive ewe recovery session, all about managing your ewes post-weaning. And what do you think, Sam?
You need to keep the grass nice and green with some hay, and you need to keep some good fun looking after your farm in 2020.
What about you, Maddie?
Keep the ewes producing and look after your family.
No worries, that sounds like it. So, hopefully you have a special period coming up and we can make 2020 a real winner for you and for the wider sheep industry. What I really want to focus on tonight is our theme of ewe recovery. We're going to talk a lot about condition score, and just in introducing this, I just want everyone online to understand that condition score, although we promote it as a management tool, just remember 25% of an animal's condition score is set by genes. So we use it as a management tool, but that little loin chop on the angle there, I often refer to that as the fuel tank. And the question we pose to people throughout this year is, are you building an animal with a long-range fuel tank or a Peewee 50 fuel tank? So we're going to talk a lot about condition score and ewe recovery, but it doesn't all come through management. It's a combination of genes and management, and that genetic component links really strongly correlation of in the order of 80-90% back to muscle and fat as measured is the link to condition score on the genetic component. So just keep that in mind. Obviously, as we talk about ewe recovery, and Matt's be breathing in and out because I'm going to get to Bramble in a couple of slides and he'll take over the show. But, you know, one of the things that many farmers have had to do this year is to wean down to quite young ages. And just remember, once a lamb's to 10 weeks of age, it's basically getting 80% or more of its diet from things other than mum. At that point in time, she's pretty much given them companionship and worms. So there's farmers online that have had to do things this year, like, for example, is postpone the marking process so that they've taken the lambs through and weaned them without being marked because they didn't want to check them in any way, and they've marked them at a later stage. So they've had to do things like that because they've weaned lambs down to sort of 5 and 6 weeks of age. Does take some attention to detail. But a key part of getting bub off mum is to give her a chance to recover and go back around again. And that's sort of the key step in this scenario. One of the things that the Lifetime Maternals research did just recently with 4 or 5 sites around the country, led by a team of researchers involving the likes of Andrew Thompson and Ralph Berent from down in Vic DPI and Andrew from over at Murdoch Uni. What they did is they certainly weaned lots of ewes of varying score. And if you have a little look at this graph, ewes that went out communally in the paddock together that were 2.5 score in the same mob as ewes that were 3.5 score running in the same paddock. Basically, those skinnier ewes have a real appetite to eat. They also have a lower maintenance requirement because they're at a lower body weight at that point in time. And so between that weaning and the next joining, those ewes were able to basically recover about half of their condition score difference. So where there was a full score difference running in the same paddock, that was halved, mainly driven by their higher appetite and lower requirement. We can do better than that, and Matt Browning, you'll see online tonight's doing better than that again, because rather than just letting the skinny ewes' appetite drive the outcome with a whole range of resources, we look at our spread, which is often all the way from 2 to 4 score at weaning, and you get the right ewe in the right paddock. And if she needs building up, she'll get one circumstance. If she's got a bit to give back, she'll get a different circumstance. So, but yeah, this desire to eat kind of back to their biological optimum is something that we're really kind of utilising from weaning on. The whole reason that we're doing this, just remember, is to set our potential for next year. So the merino work has shown per condition score 20% extra lamb scanned, but we've measured sheep up as high as 40, even into the low 40s. So you need to understand the responsiveness of your flock. If you've got the non-merino or maternal types, their response based on the maternals research was about 24% per condition score gain. So very similar in their responsiveness. The additional thing we found in the maternals work, which is also part of this ewe recovery discussion and setting up next year, is we found in the maternals every kilo that was gained pre-weaning is worth double in next year's scanning to the kilos gained post-weaning. So although with Matt's circumstance, we're going to talk tonight about ewe recovery post-weaning, and that was the message from the merino research. It didn't matter how you got to the condition score you did at joining, as long as you could try and get them to 3 score plus. You know, that was where we'd like to sit. Well, in the maternals work, the pathway to get there was shown to matter. And what's interesting, I think those of us that are running those non-merino types, we're really trying to drive lamb growth rates. And I think quite often we do get some weight gain into those ewes during lactation. So the weight we can get on those sheep types prior to weaning does really help set them up for next year. And you can see that those ewes that went twin the year before at the same condition score will scan sort of 15% or more extra fetuses at the same score. So the challenge is to get them to come back around again and go 2-2, not go 2 dry or 2 back to single. So the messages from that recent lifetime maternals research on ewe recovery was low condition score ewes can compensate significantly both pre and post weaning. They have a big appetite. So if you've got the quality and quantity of feed to put in front of them, they will compensate. There are carryover effects on reproductive performance that are greater than just the absolute body condition score at that next joining. It does matter how you get there. Profile does matter. But we want to build these ewes up, you know, at the end of the growing season by allocating the best of the feed we've got left to get them into that condition for the next year at the lowest, you know, possible cost. Now, as we sort of swap over and look at Matt's circumstance, clearly he didn't have a lot of whole farm sort of paddock feed to achieve that outcome, but he's absolutely sticking with the theme that by setting these ewes up, it's really setting up next year's crop. So, Matt, can you hear us online, mate? You got those kids in bed?
All in bed and ready.
Oh, geez, you're doing better than me, Father of the Year. Just give everyone online a quick, Matt's one of our champions in our network across Southeast Australia. Just give particularly those visitors a quick intro on Baramble Station, and I've got this one which is off the Paraway website and another slide that I can flick to, but you better introduce yourself, mate.
Thanks, Jace. Yeah, so I manage Baramble, which is one of Paraway's pastoral's properties. It's an aggregation mixture of livestock, which is obviously comprised of merino business and dryland cropping, irrigation, which is the next slide. Yeah, which is we've got 370 hectares dedicated for sheep and 700 hectares dedicated for irrigation to grow corn and cotton. And we also lease 3,000 hectares to bring us up to 5,000 hectares of dryland farming. So I suppose we normally have 12,000 merino ewes have joined in 2018, and we sold down the end of 2019, and we're back to 6,500 now. Basically trying to work out ways to try and maximise revenue in these tighter years is becoming challenging. So, yeah, looking at alternatives on what to do and how to come out of it.
Yeah. So Matt, on that front, you've had a significant reduction in ewe numbers this spring, and we'll show the group a couple of the pictures of what conditions you had to lamb in. In the interest of tonight's theme, just with limited number of ewes, you really want to set them up to get as many fetuses on board. I think Ken Solly was going to join us tonight, and one of Ken's sayings is, if you don't start high, you can't end high. And you know what you're really wanting to do is to set these ewes up to, you know, to scan as many possible fetuses from your reduced ewe base as possible. So you've kind of really focused on how they've gone since weaning, yeah?
Yeah, that's been our focus. We learned a lot from 2018 and didn't get it quite right. And yeah, learned a lot from that. And going forward, just focused purely on drafting and getting sheep into condition right, so they could recover and to hopefully come out the other end and have a successful joining and a scanning result.
And you had to keep lifting your game because this year was a worse season than 2018. So I think you said to me today, you've had about a third of your annual rainfall, with the biggest individual fall being about 12 mils. So it's certainly been a challenging year, yeah?
Yeah, like, as you said, the biggest rainfall has been 12 mils, and that rainfall that we have had hasn't been really helpful because it's been 3 and 4 mils to get to it, you know, that third, so it hasn't added up to being a cumulative number. So
yeah, it hasn't meant anything. So
no.
This is just a bit of a review slide for everyone, and then the next slide will show you a picture of how they sheep lambed out, but just gives you a bit of an idea of the numbers. Matt lambed a lot of the ewes. The twinners were all on self feeders and in pretty handsome condition score, and got some great marking rates there. And the singles were treated a little bit harder and certainly weaned a bit lower than they started out. So, but still great marking rates. Matt, anything you want to say in particular about those numbers or that experience? I'll just put a picture up now without turning you back in time too much, but that's the scenario that he had to lamb down on. And I think there's some twinners there on one of the self feeders, Matt. Yeah.
Yeah, look, we learned a lot from that. It was the biggest thing we learned from it was the induction phase prior to lambing, having that ewe make sure she was implemented on the feeder, and that was the biggest thing, and set the ewes up. And certainly post weaning, there was the lambs were definitely imprinted well, so that process became pretty easy. So
yeah, one of the challenges that people, for those that are more down south in the areas that I farm in, that they had this year in regions like this, they had the ewes in containment, managed them quite well to condition score, and when they busted them out into the sort of environments that are showed in this picture, the ewes decided to walk and walk and walk, and some of the best conditioned ewes were where they ran into real issues with pregtox. So this is a nice little community where they're sticking with their feeder, Matt, but did you have some challenges like that, like others, where ewes, once they came out of containment, didn't do what they should have done, and they started walking and didn't eat and compromised their own survival, yeah?
yeah, we didn't have that challenge with lambing. We had the challenge with getting them out of the containment pen into their lambing paddocks. It was like we fed them too much with kindness, sort of thing. Like, we had them at the right condition score. You know, if I had my time again and knew it wasn't going to rain, I would have put them out 3 weeks before, but I was hoping to get an inch or two of rain prior to lambing, and which is generally what sort of normally happens, and you get out of jail a bit. But we never got that this year, and if, heaven forbid, if we're going through it again next year, we will definitely be, you know, putting them out earlier into their lambing paddocks, because that's been the biggest learning we've had, is that trying to shift them, you know, on the cuff or a week before lambing really hurt us.
Yeah, with the scale of what you're doing. What we're going to do is go through some of your mobs of sheep. So you've got these sort of 6,500 ewes that you've weaned. You weaned around the 20th of August, yeah?
Yeah.
And so you're lambing sort of predominantly a late May, June lambing for everyone that's online, yeah?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so talk me through when you're doing the weaning process. We're going to sort of cover 4 or 5 of the mobs with footage and so on, but just that general sort of overview of what you did at weaning, and I suppose how you went about sort of utilising the resources you had and busting the sheep types up, because I think it's your attention to detail in this space that I reckon you're, from what I saw at your farm today, is where you're going to be rewarded. It's the work you put in a couple of months ago that's really going to stack up.
Yeah. So post weaning, so we wean the lambs. Obviously, at the time of weaning, obviously we this year we didn't sex the lambs. We focused more on body weight of the lambs. The lambs then went through the auto draft and got their needles and drafted 3 ways into weight groups, and half of them went into containment, and then the other half went onto the irrigation. And then you want to focus more on the ewes than the lambs, Jace?
Yeah, a bit more on the ewes, yeah.
Yeah. So basically from the 19th of August onwards, we then rolled into the next week, and then we classed our flock from top to bottom with the combination of visual and data. And then the week after that, we started shearing, and which was worked in really well then, because it meant that we could condition score and draft the ewes off the board. And then we managed according to that and allocated our feed the best, well, what feed we had according to condition score at the time, to try and get them to be at condition score 3 by basically now. And obviously we had some ewes, which were our twin ewes, which were hard to manage on the cell feeder, which were well and truly over 3 scores. So we had to try and manage them to the best of the condition without pulling it off the back too much. But yeah, make sure that we gave them a check so that they would cycle and come back in for this year, because that was probably going to be our biggest challenge coming into 2020 joining.
Yep. So you've had to ration things a bit on that heavier end, which ironically were your twinners, or predominantly, and your singles that worked a bit harder. They're trail fed. You're obviously able to control the intake more than you were on the self feeders. They weaned a bit lighter and have predominantly made up the numbers in the lighter condition score groups. So we'll see a lot of these sheep as we go through your videos. We'll also focus on the maidens, Matt. That's a group that you'll hear Matt talk about, that the year before with the tough season of 2018, that's one of the groups, to use your phrase, you felt that you buggered up last year and you were determined not to do so this year. So, and they represent a lot of your flock. So a couple of principles just as a recap before we get into the detail. Matt's really putting some effort into keeping the passengers, the performers, and removing the passengers. And by that, I mean he's doing a fair bit of wool measurement in that, and also keeping ewes that have been rearing lambs. And so he was able to use that information to inform he was forced to sell down. So that's part of it. But then also really trying to set their potential for the next year by taking what was a range of probably high ones. There would have been some 1.72 score ewes at weaning all the way through to sort of about 3.7, so about a 2 score range, and work on folding in the edges basically. So what we might do, so he feels good, and given his genetic suppliers online and that, we better show you some footage of the fat ewes first. Basically, Matt, you let the fat ewes out in what sort of circumstance compared to the others?
Our aim was to spend, obviously, the least amount of money on the ewes to try and get them back into condition. Obviously, these ewes, which are the fat ewes, which were 3, 4 and above condition score, our aim was to spend the least amount of money on them. So we put them out on our seepage lucerne country, which is not I'm not talking, it's not a flash stand of lucerne, but it's 1 plant per metre, and they've got to walk to actually get a feed. And we kept them on 100 grams of corn whilst they were out there, just to keep them ticking along. And I still think, I reckon we've maintained them at the condition score that they went out to the paddock at.
Yeah, so from a superficial score as they ran in, they look pretty good. So we'll bring the footage up now. Basically, we've got 4 main groups we're going to show you. We're going to show the fatter ewes that he put out in a circumstance where they had to walk a fair bit more. what were the other groups of ewes that you mainly set up, and how did you allocate resources to them?
Yeah, so they were our mixed age like twins that we had on the out grazing around on the Lucerne. Then we had basically a mob of ewes that were in condition score sort of 2.7 average, and then we had a mob of ewes that were sort of 2.2 condition score. So that was our aim, was to try and pick those basically the money that we saved on those twins was to invest that back into those skinnier ewes that we had.
What did you do different this year with the maiden group? Because there's a big wing of those. Well, hang on, we might have some action. Can you see that now, Matt?
Yeah.
75 days ago, they were weaned. They were the fatter end of the twins. The twins Matt looked after really well this year on self-feeders. And I know it's a challenging time to control their intake, so he's not the only farmer that some of these girls probably during last year's lambing and lactation, or this year's lambing and lactation leading up to the weaning, got a little bit more than perhaps they should have. So his twins weaned really well. So what he's done with these girls is at weaning, he's lined up all the ewes that were sort of 3.3 to 3.5 score, and he's ran them out on some country, some sort of seepage lucerne country that didn't have much lucerne in it, but they had to do a fair bit of walking, and based on his sums he thought they'd be just under maintenance. At a superficial glance here, they look to have done very well. There's certainly not too many sheep that are down under 3 score, but he's had them in a circumstance where they've had to do a lot more walking than the other sheep that he really needed to gain condition. He's confined or looked after a lot more. These ewes have been out browsing on only 100 grams, I think, of barley or corn. So they've had a light ration basically, so now that his dry matter stocks have been depleted, he can build up their ration pretty quick. But using great condition, what he wanted to do was probably peel a little bit off these, but at the end of the day make them really low cost so that he can invest the best of what he had into his other sheep to build them up. But yep, so that I think gives people a view of the better end of things, Matt. They're clearly about to see some sheep that don't look like that, but those ewes have been out working a bit harder. So this is some of the sort of around 2.3 to 2.5 score ewes, this group. So not the skinniest end, but quite a few of the singles in this group that worked a bit harder, Matt. So we'll have a look at what we've got here. We score a few of these in the race today, so they've certainly improved. So Matt, what we got in front of us here is some of your lighter ewes. They were sort of low 2s when you weaned, yeah?
Yeah, low 2s, yeah.
Yep. And we're here 70, 75 days later, getting our hands on a few of these girls. And this is a group now, everything's going in containment. We've certainly picked these ewes up, probably a good half a score across the group. She probably doesn't look it on the camera, but she's 2.7 at least, isn't she, Matt? You have a feel, mate? Might be a smidgen more.
I think a bit more, yeah.
So with that sort of weight gain, you know, half a score in, say, 75 days, having a quick look at the info, they've probably been around 5 ME surplus to put on that weight in that shorter period of time. So you were thinking yourself...
We were working on it being about 13 megs in the paddock. We roughly were working on with the patchy areas. There was about between 1,100 and sort of 1,300 kilograms of dry matter out there with the area we had. That's what we worked on trying to get. So
yeah, and so the crop hadn't sort of gone to head?
It had gone into head, but it was still just in the milky dough stage. So it was just, really, it was the ideal time for us.
So you were thinking 12 or 13 megs, and this sort of article would need about 8.
Yep.
You know, so there's your 5 surplus. So they've responded accordingly. Of course, the paddock's bugging now.
Yeah, there's nothing left there.
So on to the next plan, but it's played its role. And these would be 2 of the lighter girls, if you can see them in the whole race down the lighter end, sort of 2.5 to 2.7. There's plenty of sheep in this race as a subset of these ewes that are up around 3 score and better. So yeah, it's worked quite well to get that recovery into them at relatively low cost pretty quick.
Yeah, that's why we decided to turn to the writing the crop off, because there was nothing there to harvest. So putting the sheep in was our cheapest alternative.
Yeah,
to get a return on the investment we spent on trying to plant the crop and get something back.
Sounds good. You'll bust these up again now.
Yep.
For this next month leading up to joining, they'll sort of go in maybe the 2.5s, the ones just under.
Yes, so we'll split them up again into smaller groups that suit our containment, 500 or 600, and put them into our confinement pens and feed according to that.
Yeah.
So
ration wise, you've just got your barley in. Not quite sure yet, but it's typically probably what, about 12 ME?
12, yeah, hopefully 12 ME. Typically that's what the tests have been coming back like that we've seen so far.
Yeah, hay was huge though. You're using's nearly 12 itself, 11.9 you said.
Well, the hay is just as good of ME as what the grain has. So we looked at obviously just doing straight hay, but just the complexity of feeding straight hay just didn't make sense.
Yeah.
So
fair bit more labour time.
Yeah.
One of the things you will have observed with some of those ewes in the race, you would have thought they looked quite light and almost quite hollow. Matt, can you talk to us a bit about, with these sheep, they've been on basically a solid grain ration for 2 years. One of the things you've sort of observed almost how they present?
That's been the interesting thing as you're driving around out in the paddock. You think that, geez, these sheep aren't performing, or they're not where they are, or they've slipped. It's because they've been on a grain diet for so long. They've actually looked like they're hollow all the time and empty, but in actual fact, they actually have got that back fat on them. So it was good to get our hands back on the sheep today, because if I drove around the paddock and saw those sheep, I would have thought that they were at least 2.5 and down still, and we had underestimated what we thought we would achieve. So
yeah. And that's part of what's gone into the decision, also based on ME, that you're swinging these sheep that have been on grain for a long time. For this period leading up to joining, at least, leading up to Christmas, they're going to be more on, instead of, say, 80% grain, 20% roughage, the odds are sort of pretty much going to flip the other way, and try and build them up a bit and fill their paunch out a little bit more, yeah?
Yeah, and also just to give them a change of diet. Like it's, I don't think I'd like to be eating barley for 2 years straight, or corn, so that's just to change the appetite, and hopefully that encourages a flush as well. Because we're coming into joining, fingers crossed it works.
Quite different circumstances with these next 2 lots of sheep. If it's the skinnier ewes, the 2-score ewes, they went out to clean up the end of some irrigation bays after it had finished some other sheep, and they were sold. So that's what we're going to show you now. And then the final group is what were the maidens that lambed for the first time this year in 2019, and they were basically have been in containment most of the time between weaning and now. So the next 2 lots of sheep were allocated to very different circumstances.
Yeah, so as Jace was saying, we had surplus grass left on irrigation after we did a trade, and basically sums on feeding grain versus utilising the grass was the easiest alternative, or cheapest alternative. They basically went from a condition score of 2 and have put on a full condition score now in just a bit over 75 days. So there would have had to have been about 15 megs out in that paddock, if not more, to have them in surplus to get that condition score gain that they got. These ewes basically were our bottom grade singles that had worked the hardest for us. And basically, they've been on a Moby barley crop on the irrigation, and so they've gone from, as I said, that 2 condition score to. We didn't get our hands on them today, but we've got them in the yards now to draft in the morning, and I reckon, looking at them there, based off what we saw in the yards today, I think we've done a full condition score. That worked out to be our best. Touch wood, hopefully it's worked out to be our cheapest alternative to put the weight back on.
Yeah, and so the next group is quite different, and these girls, because they weaned their first lamb this year, and as you said, in 2018, this was the group you didn't do perhaps so well. So taking that learning, you locked them straight in containment off weaning and put them on a pretty handsome ration, which we will cover as we go through the video, Matt. So we might play the video and then get you to talk about it afterwards. So these were the maidens this year that lambed for the first time. Right, Matt. So this group's your maidens from 2019. So they've weaned their first lamb, and we're trying to get them back in buckle. We talked about them earlier. You really had a crack with these, yeah?
This was our focus. Oh, these were our focus.
Because the year before it sort of let you down a bit, yeah?
Yeah, it let us down, and it was just our mismanagement to get to where, what happened. So our focus this year going forward was to try and improve the condition of these and let the recovery period pick the ewe up. So these ewes were 2 to 2-3 condition score at weaning, and our focus was to try and get them back up to 3 condition score as quick as we could to let the recovery so they could get back in to join in December.
Yeah, well, certainly handling them here, probably the lightest ewes in this group are about 2.7, really.
Yeah.
A lot around 3 and some around 3.3. So, lot up around just over 3. So you've put close to a full score on them. And when we reflect on what you did, you sort of basically fed them because you wanted to get the recovery into them quick, because the equivalent age group after a tough 2018 let you down for 2019 scanning and lambing.
Correct.
So we don't want to repeat that. So he fed them about 1.2 kilos a week of corn, sort of 13.5 ME, not far off 12.5, 12 as an as-fed.
And working out too, they were getting about 200. We worked on giving them 200 grams of corn stubble a day, and they're not as a ME but more as a roughage source as well.
Roughage source, yeah. So we reckon they're roughly on about 15 ME or so a day for the best part of 2 months. They were locked up, so instead of needing 8.5 maintenance, is probably closer to 7. So they basically you're feeding pretty close to double their maintenance requirements,
yeah.
So 7 or 8 ME in surplus. And that would mean that in 2 months you'd put on about 0.8 of a score. So they've responded accordingly, put on close to a full score. In the last couple of weeks you've busted them out of that, and they've been out grazing and dropped back to sort of 800
grams.
Yeah.
We were assuming there was roughly about 3 or 4 megs left out in the paddock.
Yep.
Yep.
So these girls will get resorted a bit and again allocated to containment pens. There's not a huge range in them. Probably representative of the fact you perhaps don't have as much of that twinning overlay in this age group. And
no, these only had 14% twins in them, so that's a respectable.
A bit more consistent background, and you've got a bit less spread in them now, so probably get split into a couple of groups, will they?
Yeah, they'll get split into a couple of groups now is what we're doing, and draft's not ready for 2019 joining.
That sort of gives us a snapshot. We didn't cover every sheep today at your place, Matt, but you've got a few thousand there to care for, so I appreciate you having them in the yards, but you're able to tie it in with restructuring things a bit, because your farm covers now, she's pretty bare now, Matt, so pretty much everything from this point on has got to go into containment.
We're drafting, it sounds like we're drafting now to go in for joining, but we're actually drafting now to put them into containment, because I don't plan on them coming out now until it rains. So they're going to go in there, and we thought we may as well get them all drafted into their grades and groups and condition scores now, ready for joining while it's a bit cooler rather than in December when it's stinking hot. So, and it worked in well to bust them up now according to that to go into their containment pens.
And this was just some footage that we took today of some of the country, or Bell did, of some of the country as we were driving through. So Bramble is how far out of Condobolin are you, Matt?
Oh, only 20 k's out of Condobolin. So that's just a general overview of what our native country's like. Some's better than others. But yeah, as an overview, as a general, that's about our general ground cover that we've got left.
James Brady kindly put on the chat that we said 1.2 kilos of corn a week, and he is correct. We meant to say per day. So either if you said it, Matt, or I said it. One of us got it wrong. Annabelle's got another bit of footage that she can show us of some of your other native country, and then we just might have a bit of a wider chat about things. So this is a little bit barer, Matt.
Yeah. Doesn't get any prettier.
I think you get a picture of the circumstance, and, you know, for people like Matt to be weaning sort of 95 or 6% of lambs in the singles and 155 or 60 in the twins, you've just had to learn a whole new game, and that's continuing now with the ewe recovery stuff. So it's your second tough spring, and from what I saw today where you had that 2-score spread, you really folded it in, and, you know, most of the sheep now would be between sort of 2.5 and 3.5 score, and the vast majority are probably, you know, 3 to 3.3. So you've done most of the work, and by reallocating them again to their groups and tailoring their rations, you'll be able to sort of drive that home even more. I think one of the other points I did make to you today, Matt, it is a long period of time since a lot of these animals have seen any green feed. And I think it is important to try and build up their vitamin levels a little bit, vitamin E in particular. There is work that shows with some of this stuff that it can help conception rates. And with some of your irrigation bays that we didn't directly show there, he's got some irrigation bays that the weaners are on where they've picked the eyes out of it, but the rest of it's matured a bit. And I did encourage Matt, maybe with some of these groups of ewes that have seen no green feed for a period of time, to give them a run through that in this 2 or 3 weeks now prior to joining, which really sets them up. Now, I understand everyone on the hookup, probably 95% of you don't have that option of creating a bit of green leaf like Matt has. But yeah, just a chance to maybe clean up those irrigation bays and give them a bit of look at some green cover and lift their blood levels a bit, which could also help with conception, Matt.
Yeah, definitely. We allocated that grass to the weaners, but because it's gone from a vegetative state into reproduction, I think it's time that we reallocate that grass in the next 10 days, I'd say, and we will probably switch some of our weaners out that we had for that green grass that we had allocated. We'll switch that over, I believe, and we'll put that to our merinos to try and help with that, what you're talking about.
So anyway, might start to open it up if there's any questions. We've got a bigger crew than usual online, that is for sure. Not sure if there's any of the regulars or any visitors, if they're bold enough first time up to ask any questions, perhaps related to Matt or any wider sort of Q&A. But you can take yourself off mute, or you can scream out. AD&E injections, Malcolm Cock asked a question. Have you been doing anything with that, Matt, across your run of sheep?
Yes. We haven't. We've gone away from the injection because I've had more. The animals I feel have done it tough enough, and that needle generally will hurt, I believe. So we've gone to a loose lick AD&E. Yep. Versus the injection.
Any other further questions from around the crew? Alan Rishman, what were you feeding the twins in the self-feeders, and how much were you letting them eat? Well, the latter part of that question's an interesting one. Controlling intake during lambing and lactation with self-feeders is not that easy when there's nothing in the paddock. But Matt, can you answer that question? What was in the self-feeders? And when you back calculated it, how much did they end up consuming?
I was just working through it there earlier. Basically, our twins in the self-feeder were on a lamb finisher pellet from Riverlea. They were eating between basically they were eating between 11.7 and 12.5 kilos a week. I'll get it right this time. In the self-feeder, which some people probably raising their eyebrows at the cost of that. That worked out to be, for the total over the whole lambing period, they ate $55 worth of grain. That was from scanning until the point of weaning. So that was a 12-week or 10.5, 11 week by the time we finished weaning. That was $55 spent over that period of time, which, you know, is a big investment. But we had spent $27 on our singles, and, you know, as we discussed before, our twins were 3-4 and better condition score, and singles were in a 2-2 to 2.5 condition score.
So
So
the returns you got from that extra feeding, even though they probably took a bit more than you would like, they weaned about a score fatter. You told me today they cut 1.5 or more. How much more wool did they cut?
I cut our twins as a whole, because we fleece weighed them, cut 1.6 kilos more than what the singles cut. And the weaning weight of those twin lambs was 4.5 kilos more in our twins versus our singles. So when you look at it as a cost in that, just for that little period, it sounds like a lot, but if you equate it out over the whole time to what we've had to now spend on those singles to get them up, I reckon that the twins, what we fed them, are in front, because we've got those lambs off the twin off and away, and they've been sold, whereas the singles we've had to keep the lamb on as well to try and pick them up to where the twin lambs were.
Yeah, no, it's been a challenge, and I know that there'll be people online just thinking, holy crap, that's a huge investment. But, you know, those sorts of numbers, you are getting it back in wool cut, you're getting it back in lamb weight, and you'll get it back in setting them up for next year's crop. Hopefully, when it rains again, you can go back to doing it at a lower cost way, but you have had to rationalise your numbers a bit as well. Chris Wyhern from WA has put a comment up about flushing. Now, we did do a project over here in Victoria that involved, it might have been 20 sites, 25 sites, where we looked at the impact of 2 or 3 things on basically flushing ewes for conception. One of the treatments was 500 grams a day of lupins fed from a week prior to joining and a week into joining. That lifted scanning rates over and above the animals at that point in time were being fed, you know, a cereal grain ration to meet their deficit in energy. This was sort of typically done. These trial sites were done sort of around February, March in most circumstances, maybe late January. And the lupin treatment over and above the control, you might say, which involved cereal grain on dry feed, all these treatments were lifted flushing 10 or 12%. The other treatment that not many people online will have access to, at least not this season, was a week on lucerne prior to joining and for a week into joining, and for that 2-week flush, the average scanning lift was 20 to 25%, so about double the impact of the lupins. As far as your question about where the best return came, or the best flushing response came in that research work, we couldn't identify any significant differences, and they were pretty big trial numbers in the impact of flushing between the lighter and fatter end. So as far as the biggest bang for your buck, there was no significant difference there. I suppose the one comment I will make is one of the key themes I think that's really important to understand in ewe recovery is you're not just setting the ewe up to try and achieve good scanning rates, you're setting her up for the whole ensuing reproduction cycle. So I do have some challenges with this concept of tricking really skinny ewes into conceiving, and particularly conceiving if they happen to conceive multiples, because conception isn't our biggest limitation typically. Generally, the conception rates, I know in recent season in New South in particular, that there's been a bigger proportion of dries and so on, but you know, it's that wastage between scanning and lambing, and there's not many seasons on many farms in my years of experience where the ewes lamb in a higher condition score than what they join in. So in line with your question, you got a 2-score ewe and you try and trick her into getting in lamb, you've got to have a really good clear regime in mind to actually set that ewe up to lamb. Because if you trick her to getting in lamb and then she drags herself through that pregnancy at low 2 scores, you're pretty much looking at dialing up potentially high ewe death and high lamb losses. So I suppose I understand that it is what it is this year and people have got to do what they got to do, but don't forget that part of the theme for this ewe recovery isn't just to get them to scan well, it's to set those ewes up, because most of them will drop condition between scanning and between joining and lambing. So we're trying to build up some buffer for that next time to go round. Direct question from Craig, Matt, about the weaning weight of the lambs. And you did talk to me a bit about that. The theme tonight's the ewes, but the heavier lambs you sold off, and you can tell us their weights, but the other lighter ones you doubled their weight and got some great results. So can you just talk us through that?
Yeah, so our lambs, our heavier end, we basically went 22 kilos and above, and then 21 kilos down to 16, and then 15 and down was our draft ranges. So yeah, basically our 22 kilos and above, those were the weaners, went straight off 3 days later off mum, off to a restocker. And then basically, yeah, just slowly been trickling out the rest of the weather weaners. The ewe weaners basically went into confinement pens and have been fed since at ad lib on self-feeders on a ration of 80-20 of lupin and barley.
So did you capture in that, because I'm trying to do multiple things at once, which I'm not much good at, did you capture the 14 kilo fellas that you doubled their weight and you just sold them in the last week or so?
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was pretty amazing effort. And not unlike Jack Brennan when he talked in our previous session about the sort of cost to gain, you got some pretty efficient gain out of those lightweight animals. And I yielded a call from someone who might actually be online tonight. He's saying, well, what's this minimum weight to go into the feedlot? And certainly that return on that short amount of feeding to take them from 14 to 28 kilos, their cost to gain in that phase is pretty efficient, and you've turned them into something that other people want to invest in. Yeah.
Basically, yeah, like if they're eating 3% of their body weight at that age, they're eating not much, and your cost to gain is huge. At the time we were sort of looking at an animal that was worth $40 to sell them what we've sold them for at the other end was a great outcome.
Yeah, in a short period of time. So, I echo Rick Morris sent in a comment. He said, amazing effort, Matt and the team. And I know I only go up into these regions and see you on occasions, but yeah, I sort of drove out today referring to Annabelle, like awesome effort with a lack of resources and certainly not much luck from upstairs on your side, but you're a better farmer as a result of this, as far as your skill set and ability to deal with varying circumstances. And I know you're really passionate about, trying some new things as well. Like you are down on your ewe numbers, a few thousand. So you got about 5,000 ewe weaners. So we actually have a national project that I'm leading that's just getting going on trying to fill in some of our gaps in understanding on the whole ewe lambs thing. So, that's something you're going to stick your neck out and have a bit of a look at with a couple of thousand lead ewe lambs, perhaps.
I'm hoping, like everyone else, that this thing's going to end soon, ways in which we can come out of it and not go into this potential ridiculous restocker market and have to pay a lot to get back to where we were. And one way we can do it is if we've got the resources and the feed with our irrigation, is to try and get these ewe lambs to join. And at the moment, we are having to containment feed them and push them. So why not try and get something back out of the investment we've put in them over the last, basically since we started from back at scanning at this year, and try and get some of that investment back and get a lamb out of them in within the 18 months rather than only getting one clip of wool. So that's been our next focus on trying to improve that area.
Yeah. And look, certainly that whole ewe lamb space is a classic case of, bred well, fed well, whole proactive management regime. So it'll be a bit of a learning curve there. But, for those listeners that are online tonight, you'll see us reach out for trial sites that, not everyone will have the scale of a few thousand you're joining, but probably for the trials we'll look to do in a whole range of sheep types. You can send me a message or reach out, but if you're sort of joining 500 odd ewe lambs or more and you're really keen to look at helping us to understand some of the variables that impact on not only conception rates but the survival of the ewe lamb herself and her lambs. To give you an example, some of the things that we don't fully understand in that is the impact of growth rate during joining on scanning rates. There's been some work done in merinos in that, but not non-merino types. What the minimum joining weights really should be. There'll be heaps of people online that are saying, well, I don't join under 42 kilos and stuff like this. Well, we did work 10 years ago actually in James Petty's online where we were scanning 90% of fetuses out of 30 to 33 kilo composite ewe lambs. And what we've since learned is a lot of those were twins and triplets, and they'll give you some pretty high scanning rates at lower joining rates. In fact, they'll give you the same scanning rate as a single at about 5 kilos less. So we understand a bit about that, but we don't understand the repercussions necessarily of maybe what should inform our minimum joining weights is the survival of the ewe lamb herself and her lamb. So exciting space. That's a digression of what we've come on tonight, but it sort of fits into the theme of, how are we going to continue to sustain our flocks and sustain our markets? It's a real challenge, and it's a space that we certainly looking to do more in. So Matt, thanks very much for your contribution tonight. Really fits in with the Lambs Alive thing, and because of you really stand for being a champion in our group, because with the resources or lack of it you've had and the proactive management you've had in place, you're putting a lot of work into measuring your sheep as well, which is outstanding in a commercial flock of your scale. It really sort of, your effort sort of reflects what we stand for as a group. So don't know whether we can give him a clap. Group clap all around, but fair effort. So just in rounding out, I suppose, what we do in the Lambs Alive group, there'll be lots of members in the group that don't necessarily make it onto the calls, so all the calls are recorded, and even sometimes we see some pretty rare people, not people, but they're in rare circumstances watching the calls. They might be in their auto steer machinery or whatever it is. So, there's lots of people that are part of our group that aren't directly on tonight. So I see lots of questions still coming in about the whole ewe lamb discussion. We certainly already in the group have ran a little Zoom earlier in the year on this ewe lamb space, but that might be something we can reach out to the wider public if there's a fair bit of interest in that between now and Christmas to keep the discussion going and answer some more of these questions that are coming in. But so basically with those that are Lambs Alive members, we have one key session coming up to finish out the year where we're going to really review all the lamb survival outcomes across the group and across different sheep types and different locations. So that'll be really exciting to look at how we've gone this year in turning our potential into reality. So that's upcoming in the next couple of weeks, and people have been submitting their data, which is really exciting. So we'll reach out and make sure more of that information comes in. But we're talking tens of thousands of ewes that are in the group, and lots of good learnings that we'll have there to drive continuous improvement. For our visitors tonight, we'll reach out to you a bit more, maybe another specialist Zoom, that sort of thing we might be able to offer you, but there'll be a wider intake into the program in the new year for those of you that have enjoyed it. Really looking to sort of grow Lambs Alive nationally. It's kind of all in the name, really. I think you get the picture of what we stand for. And it is about really, removing this massive kind of handbrake that we have on our industry at this present time where, dare I say it, each year we're losing in excess of about 10 million lambs. They don't disappear up a rabbit warren. They're conceived. 80% of them are lost in the first sort of 2 or 3 days of life. And it's one of the few issues in our industry that has end-to-end implications. It affects us as producers. It's worth about $1 billion in lost profit per annum to the Australian sheep industry after the cost of the interventions that make a difference. And that's in a $7 or $8 billion industry. But those numbers of $1 billion lost profit each year doesn't count the impacts on our processing sector, which they're going to be screaming out for supply, and certainly we could lose national capital there as far as processing, and that could be in both sheep meat and some compromise in the early processing in the wool overseas because of a drop in supplies, which you will have read about in the media. And then not to mention the consumer end. What's our consumers really want? Well, they want consistent supply, good quality. They can't get consistent supply of the current regime we've got. We can't differentiate through our processing network because there's an inadequate supply to allow that. And they want these animals to be produced in an appropriate manner. And I reckon we can get in front of the ball with this lamb loss thing as an industry and turn what's potentially a challenge and a threat into a great opportunity for our industry. We've done heaps of the background work, and it's people like the Lambs Alive members that we want to put all that attention to detail into practice and convert, as much as our potential into reality as we can. So there's producers online here that have lifted their lamb survivals into that 85-90% range, and it's not just a non-merino thing. There's merino farmers as well that are part of our network that have achieved that. There's others that their circumstance haven't been as fortunate, or they've still got bits and pieces to work on that haven't achieved those sort of results. But when we do our comparison in the wrap-up call, we'll really get a feel for that from the data. But so I reckon we shouldn't go over too far time-wise, because that is a bit of a feature of Jason talking too much. So I hope our visitors have enjoyed us tonight. Send us in some feedback, and we're really keen to keep this thing progressing and really grow this initiative so that we'll grow it outside of the kind of little pocket in Southeast Australia and the couple from Kangaroo Island and so on, and we'll get further up into New South Queensland and righto into a WA where we've had some visitors from tonight. So thanks very much for your attendance, and we'll keep in touch. Obviously, the members have got the rest of the program to finish through, and those that were visitors from tonight, send us any of the feedback, and we'll keep in touch with opportunities to be part of it going forward. So thanks very much.